And here in India, we have our own texts, and we don't study them in the proper academic manner. We study them only emotionally, either to castigate them or to glorify them. That does not help us. How is then a text to be studied? You know, I will read out to you a particular verse written by Abhinavagupta. Abhinavagupta was a great commentator of early 11th century who wrote an extensive commentary called the Abhinavabharati on the Natya Shastra. And it is only because of his commentary that we are able to make any sense out of that text, you see. Otherwise, so many things have happened in last 2000 years, so much of practical knowledge in the field of art, in the field of drama and dance has been lost, that we could not have figured out what exactly is written in the Natya Shastra, except for the commentary called Abhinavabharati. What does he say? How is a text to be studied? When a text is before you, then as a scholar, as a deep reader, how will you? And this will apply to Manusmriti, Yajnavalkya Smriti, or Arthashastra, or Kama Sutra, or Dhanurveda, or any so-called Shastra. Yesterday I talked about what is a Shastra, and I said, Shastram iti shasanopayam. And this is again a quote from Abhinavagupta, that it is investigation into a particular area of knowledge, art or science, and a whole summary of how it is to be done. That is a Shastra. So, when you read a Shastra, once the Shastra is before you, how will you make sense out of it? And this is what Abhinavagupta says, that look, I have written now a commentary on the Natya Shastra, and this is the way I have made sense of it. And this is how a Shastra is to be read. So he says, Upadeyasya sampatha tad anyasya pratikanam. I'll read out the verse. Upadeyasya sampatha tad anyasya pratikanam sphuta vyakhya virodhanam. Sphuta vyakhya virodhanam virodhanam pariharaha supurnata lakshanusaranam klishta vaktavyansha vivechanam sangatihi paunarukthyanam samadhana samakulam. Now these are the many things that I have to undertake. First, Upadeyasya sampatha. I have to make and decide what is the correct reading. What would be a critical reading of the actual words of the text. So I have to make a critical edition of the text, first thing. We were all told that in India, ancient India, there was nothing called critical editions and right kind of text and right choices. This is something which has just come to us from the scientific West, you know. Now here is Abhinavagupta saying that you have to decide which is the correct reading. And you have to mark, tad anyasya pratikanam, and you have to mark out that this is a wrong reading. An example, You know, in Kalidas's Meghdut, there is a line where it says, Ashadasya Pratham Divase Megham Ashlishta Sanu. That is on the first day of Ashad, Ashadasya Pratham Divase. Now there is also a reading in some texts, Ashadasya Prasham Divase. So is Pratham the correct reading or Prasham the correct reading? Pratham means the first day and Prasham means the last day. So which is the correct reading? This is what Abhinavagupta means. You have to decide. Because you get these readings from different manuscripts. The different manuscripts have existed for hundreds and hundreds of years. So how are you going to decide? Is it the last day or is it the first day? And here it may not matter so much because it still remains Ashad. But in some of the text it can be just the opposite meaning. The whole thing can fall apart if it's the wrong reading. So the first thing is to know the correct reading of the text, but how will you do it? By internal evidence. By seeing the text as a whole. That Pratham Divase, the first day, will not make sense here. It has to be the last day for this reason. Because this has been said elsewhere. Or it appears that it cannot be the last day. Now, in my opinion, Prathama Divase is the right reading, not Prashama Divase, or the last day, because, you know, he sees the cloud. Now, if it is the last day, then he must have been seeing the cloud for full 1 month, isn't it? And then it's after 1 month he says, oh, cloud messenger, can you take this message to my dear wife? Now, it's not impossible, but it's more likely that the moment he sees on the very first day is this great cloud coming up, and he thinks of him that he is, of course, going to north. You know, he was living in a place called, Ramgarh, some sort of a name, near Nagpur. Ramagiri, that is the name given there, right? But it doesn't gel to say that he saw the clouds for 1 month and at last day he thought that now this could be my messenger. So it's more reasonable to believe that Prathama Divase is the right reading. And that's how we go about in all critical edition making. If anybody has done any, making a critical edition of a text, whether you do it for Shakespeare or you do it for Kalidas or for Shankaracharya, the method is the same. But this was practiced in India because production of manuscripts and correction of manuscript was the most essential thing. You see, in ancient times, manuscripts had to be rewritten in India every 25 to 30 years because these manuscripts were either on bhurja patra. Bhurja is the skin of a particular tree, so you get a leaf kind of a thing on which you can write with some sort of a brush and ink. That is bhurja patra. So a lot of manuscripts from ancient India, they come on bhurja patra. This is before papyrus or paper in India. Or you wrote on talpatra, on which you etched. You see, ink was not used all the time, but you etched. So in 25 years or 30 years, the manuscript would tend to fall apart, and the weather here is such. So the teacher had to get the manuscripts rewritten. It's like we go and get a new edition today after our edition has become 100 years old and the pages have fallen apart. But at that time, it had to be done 25 or 30 years or so. And every school would look for some students who were good as lipic or writing, and they'll give them admission. They may not be very good for carrying the ideas forward, but they were good calligraphers or they were good makers of manuscripts. लोटा मांजने वाले भी शिष्य रखे जाते थे. आश्रम को लोटा मांजने वाले भी चाहिए, खाली छोटा मोटा काम करे, गाय भैंस को देख लें. So you need everybody in a university. This was essential to mark out the mistakes made by the copier. And there was a term for it called lipik pramad. That is laziness of a copier. So he sees prathama divise and he writes prasham divise. And you have to correct it in your next edition. So the first thing Abhinavagupta says is upadeyasya sampatha. Upadeya means that which I have been given, that which has come to me. I must make a correct reading and cross out the incorrect reading. Tadanyasya pratikanam. Sputa vyakhya. Then I must do a clarification of the terms used there. Now, in every text, some words are used peculiar to that particular system of knowledge. इसके बारे में एक कहानी है जो आप एडिट कर देना है. तो मैं वो कहानी सुनाता हूँ कि एक बहुत बड़े आचार्य थे पंडित जी, उनके पेट में बहुत दर्द हुआ. There was a great grammarian and he fell ill and he had massive pain in his stomach. So next door there was a Vaidya, a doctor. He goes there and says, "Come, give me medicine." The wife of the doctor, Vaidya, says, "Vaidji bahar gaye. He is not in town." So it doesn't matter. Give me the text of Sushrut, the great doctor. I'll read it. I'll find out what is there for pain of the stomach or udar shul, and I'll go make my own medicine. Don't worry. So he picks up and he starts reading, and it's written there that for udar shul, that is for pain in the stomach, the medicine is kantakari. Kantakari, kantakari. Says, wow, so simple. All I have to do is to take kantakari. And what is kantakari? Kantak means thorn, ari means the enemy. So the enemy of the thorn is my shoe. It prevents me from a thorn hurting me. So he goes home, he boils his shoe, makes a concoction out of it, drinks it, and dies. Few days later, the wife of this great grammarian, she goes next door and says, "This is what's happened." and your books are false. तुम्हारा शास्त्र झूठा है, उसमें क्या लिखा है बकवास ये, कंटकारी पियो तो मर गया बेचारा अच्छा होने से. My husband died instead of getting well. So the Panditji said, look, come with me. So the Vaidya, he goes and takes him into the hills, and there is a particular herb, right? And he says, now this is the herb, very soft and juicy, and if you boil this, and if you take the concoction, it removes the pain, because it removes the kantak of the pain, not the kantak on the road. That's why it is called kantakari. And Ayurveda, this is called kantakari. So in every particular discipline, the meaning is different. And then meaning changes over time. In Sanskrit, Anusandhan, till 11th or 12th century, the text by Anusandhan meant concentration. Today, Anusandhan means research. In all modern Indian languages, and even those who write Sanskrit copying Hindi, they use Anusandhan as research. So the word Anusandhan was not used as research in ancient times. So if you read a classical text and you decipher Anusandhan as research, you will get the wrong meaning. Within the context of a particular text, you have to see the terminology and how is that defined. Every text, that this is the meaning. That's why just knowing Sanskrit is not sufficient to teach a particular text. You must know the subject, the area, and the practice of that text. Otherwise, you won't get the real meaning. You will not be able to understand. So, Sputa Vyakhya, you have to explain the terminology. You have to make. And Virodhanam Parihara. Now, in every text, there are certain things which are very contradictory. For instance, in Manu, it is said that Niyog is very good. But in another place, Manu says Niyog is not desirable. Then how are you going to reconcile the seemingly opposing statement? Virodhanam Parihara. How will you throw out the contradiction? Again, by showing that this applies in this context, in this period, in this particular time, and here it is said that it is Kali Varj, then obviously this is a much later verse in Manusmriti, added in Manusmriti at a much later time when Niyog had become something not desirable. Now you know what Niyog is? See, in ancient India, in order to keep the family line going, it was permitted to allow an appointed person to reproduce, to inseminate your wife. So, if a king, even after multiple marriages, after marrying 1, 2, 3, 4 women, could not get a son or get any offspring, that is, when it was proved that the person is infertile, there is virya dosh, I mean, this was all recognized and understood, then he could appoint either a well-known sage or a scholar or somebody from the family to cohabit with his wife for a given period, and at the time when the woman is capable of being impregnated according to the menstrual cycle. And when the pregnancy occurred, the person would never come back. So the person would visit the woman at the specified time. This would not be a secret thing. This would be a declared thing. It was not done under the, it was not done gupchup. It was not done by not declaring. It was a clear declaration. The person was niyukta, and the whole thing was called niyog. Now you know in Mahabharata, Satyavati called Vyasa, and Vyasa impregnated Amba, Ambalika, and I forget the name of the third lady. So this was a common practice, and this was called niyog. So Manu sanctions it, calls niyog something which is to be followed. And a later period, it is said that it's not desirable. So times changed, the social practices changed. Maybe the social practice came under abuse, or for whatever reason. Nobody has gone deeply into it. Therefore, in certain other portions of Manu, it is said that it is not desirable. So you have to reconcile the two. You have to give an answer to it. You can't say that, no, this is wrong. Manusmriti is foolish. Manu is not somebody who is logical. He writes one thing at a time and another thing at a time. Or you just can't say, our sacred texts have been polluted. There are lots of Arya Samajis who says, this is wrong in Manusmriti. I have known some people who say we should have a purified edition, and some people have prepared purified tradition of texts. I very often hear people say that the Kama Sutra was the mischief of some British writer. Some British writer who knew Sanskrit, he composed the Kama Sutra. Now, we have to be reasonable about it. And here is Abhinavagupta says, Virodhanam parihara. Virodhanam parihara. This is the one of the essential things. Then Lakshyanusaranam. Now, what does this mean, Lakshyanusaranam? I think it's a very important thing to understand. You see, any text, as I said, is about a practical art. Now, it's a technical word which defines that practical art. It calls it as lakshya. Lakshya means your target. So, if I am a poet, then what is my lakshya? Poetry. And poetry included, drama, dance compositions, and plays, and everything was poetry in ancient India. So, lakshya is poetry. And the text which talks about poetry, what is poetry, how it is practiced, where it is practiced, who are the people who practice poetry, who are the people who enjoy it, who are the people who receive it, who are the rasikas, that text is the Shastra of poetry. And what is the first Shastra of poetry? Natya Shastra. So, Natya Shastra is the Lakshana Grantha of the Lakshya Natya. Right? So, Lakshyanusaranam. In other words, when you are defining, when you are commenting on a particular Shastra, you have to see the practice of that Shastra. How is that being practiced? In the case of Abhinavagupta, he is writing here on Natya. So he has to see how is Natya being practiced today. What do I see today on the stage? What do I see in the lives of people who are great actors? What do I see today as audience? How is this thing which is described in the Shastra is done today on stage? Is it done or not? Has it disappeared? Has it changed over time? Has it changed from the time what is described in the Shastra? That is called Lakshyanusaranam, observing the contemporary science or art and relating it to the older text, Shastra or manual. That is the essential thing, Lakshyanusaranam. Then, Klishta Vaktavyansha Vivechanam. There are certain portions of the text which are very terse, very difficult. It's very difficult to understand them. One should make them simple. One should not leave them untouched or make them more complicated, One should not kind of make it so complicated by trying to make a display of scholarship that the whole thing becomes more inaccessible. It should become very accessible. It should be made clear. Klishta Vaktavyansha Vivechanam. Vivechana is necessary. Repeated analysis and explanation is necessary to make the difficult portions easy. Then Sangatihi Paunaruktyana. Then certain things are repeated. They are said here, they are said in the middle of the text, they are said at the end of the text. Now the question is, why is this person repeating it? Isn't it enough to say it once? Why is he mentioning it again? So it is being said and again. Why? You have to explain that. That here the meaning has changed, or here the context has changed. So Sangati, you have to make a reconciliation between what is said earlier and what is said later. And the two should together make a meaning. Sangatihi Paunaruktyana. And then finally, you should deal with some difficult questions. About every science, there are some very difficult questions, unsolved questions. So you must give a samadhan. You must provide an answer that this is it. For instance, if a portion of how a particular scene was to be done, there are lots of doubts as to what does this mean. Or if people are not able to understand certain parts of the architecture of a stage, then you define them, then you make them simple, then you give them an answer. That look, here it is, these are my reasons, this is what I observe, this is how I see practice being done, and this is the answer. That is samadhan. You must give a samadhan to the whole thing. So all these texts have to be, all these techniques have to be adopted in seeing the text as a whole. Now what does this mean? That the text has to be seen as a whole.